say that this piece of research that I've been working on is part of a project that is part of our Reading the Bible in the Context of Islam work out of Oxford. And since I've been in Houston, we've been working on a project which we call Daniel Islam Apocalyptic. I have Dr. David Cook of Rice University to acknowledge for that. It's because of his interest in Islamic apocalyptic that I got into this in the first place. So what I'm doing today is part of, if you like, the reception history of Daniel in Islamic context. There's a history of the use of Daniel to think about Islam right from the late 7th century. And I felt that we needed to have something about the use of Daniel to interpret what's going on amongst Muslim nations right now. So I set myself the task of looking to see how Daniel was being used in popular YouTube videos relating to Gaza last summer. So what I'm going to do today is to share with you some of what I have discovered. I can say that this is the most difficult piece of research I have ever tried to do. And I would not advise you to try and research popular YouTube videos. It's not an easy thing to do. And it's given me some results that really surprised me, but also really upset me. So I'm going to start with two of the most disturbing video clips. This one comes from last summer, and it's from John Hagee, who's a very well-known preacher in Texas. He's just been talking about the Battle of Armageddon and how it is going to finish.
On it from the east, and an accompaniment of army meeting them from the west. Just as these two armies are getting ready to fight each other, Jesus Christ comes from heaven with all of his holy angels, and every believer, every one of you who profess Christ will be mounted on a white horse. Some of you are going to have to learn how. Will be mounted on a white horse. Jesus Christ will come. His first thing will be to destroy every soldier that's on that battlefield. Instantly, he says the blood will flow to the bridle of a horse. That's at least that deep for 180 miles. God is going to wipe Israel's enemies off the face of the earth.
And you might like to read what it says about that video. Okay. The next one
here is called the Prince of Persia. And that's the force, that is the demonic power that has always hated Israel, has always been against Israel. And that's what Daniel encountered when he was in Babylon. The Prince of Persia really is the Persian sun god Mithras. And what Mithras effectively did was to strip the power from the church. When Constantine came into power, and he began to very slowly but methodically strip away the authority of the blood of Jesus, strip away the power of the Holy Spirit, strip away all the things that made the church such a driving, overcoming, powerful force for 300 years. The church has never come back into that place of authority, power, of knowing our authority, of standing in our authority. And this is the confrontation that God has called the church to right now. Israel is in the war. He's called the church to this confrontation with Mithras.
That is absolutely right.
Now, earlier this year, Judy Block came up and she had her boots on and she talked about crushing the head of the enemy. And I gave a testimony about that, and Chuck said, you need to get some alligator boots. So I wore my alligator boots today. And when I came in, Brian came up to me. He said, you wore those boots. The Lord says you wore those boots for a reason today. When you see your moment, take it and crush the head of the enemy. So what I want to say today is the church is getting her boots back on. And we will not be stripped of our power and authority. We will hold up the blood of Jesus against every foe and against every enemy. We will stand with Israel and God's people, and we have our boots on.
Well, as I said to some of the folk who were here before we started, it's not just what people are saying, but how they are saying it. And not everybody is talking like that. Those are the two clips that disturbed me most, because of the level of emotion that you can see being stirred as people are rejoicing in the idea of the enemy, whoever you see the enemy as, being trodden down. So I have been looking particularly for uses of the book of Daniel. And I found two major surprises. The first one, and you will find this in that same video from John Hagee, shortly before he starts talking about the Battle of Armageddon, is the idea that the Antichrist is going to make peace between Israel and the Palestinians. That was completely new to me. I never knew that anybody believed that the Antichrist was going to be a peacemaker. And yet I have discovered that the Antichrist as peacemaker is something that's a very, very common belief amongst a sector of Christians in the US. And I guess, therefore, amongst particular sectors of Christians around the rest of the world, but not the ones that I know. And the second thing surprised me was that people were using, the Antichrist idea is from Daniel 9, and that they were using the idea of the Prince of Persia in Daniel 10 to explain the hostility of Iran towards Israel and also towards America. So I decided to have a look at that and try and find out where this came from and to look at the interpretative lines within American Christianity that have led to these kind of uses of Daniel 9 and Daniel 10. So here is the passage from Daniel 10. This is a vision that Daniel has of an angel that's coming to him and explaining why it's taken 3 weeks to answer his prayers. And you'll see that he has this vision where somebody touches him, reassures him, and says, this is verse 13, that the Prince of Persia withstood me for 21 days, but then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So this is the verse, the Prince of Persia, some kind of spiritual power, which was now being projected onto Iran today. And here are the verses from Daniel 9 that are being interpreted today. This is another vision that Daniel has in response to prayer for the restoration of Israel. For those who don't know Daniel, Daniel is situated in Babylon and in Persia as part of the exile. So he's told 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. And these 70 weeks are something that have gone into the reception of Daniel down the centuries in trying to think about how this might apply to the last days. So, know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. The anointed one, the prince, is generally amongst Bible-believing Christians considered to be Jesus the Messiah, although many of you listening will know that the alternative is Antiochus, it is the high priest at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. But all these people that I'm studying, this is clearly the Messiah. So there'll be 7 weeks. Then 62 weeks shall be again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after 62 weeks, the anointed one, the prince, shall be cut off and have nothing. And a prince of the people who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war, desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half a week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the decree end is poured out on the desolator. So these people that I'm looking at, people like John Hagee, see a gap in the middle of verse 26. And that between the time of Jesus and the time of the end, the prince who is to come, i.e. the Antichrist, there is a gap of indefinite length. And then there is going to be a triggering of the last week, which will come with a flood. There'll be war. There'll be the Antichrist. He'll make a covenant. He'll put an end to sacrifice offering and bring the abomination of desolation. The framework which arises out of this is known generally as premillennialism, with the idea that the millennial reign of Christ will happen after the second coming of Christ. It's part of a system known as dispensationalism, which divides history into 7 dispensations. And the other word you need to know is pre-tribulation. The idea is that the time of the Antichrist and all that is going on then is going to move into a time of terrible suffering called the tribulation. But that believing Christians are going to be caught up in the rapture before that happens, i.e. the Christians are going to be caught up before the tribulation, i.e. they're going to escape it. So this is a whole bundle of ideas. Sorry. Yeah. Within that, what has happened is that over the last 150 years, the scheme has grown up. So now somebody like John Hagee can just flash up Daniel 9:27 and go through this list of events and assume that everybody sitting in front of them will accept them. So first expectation, the Jews will have returned to the land before the end happens. Second, the Antichrist is going to appear. Third, that strong covenant in verse 27 is a peace treaty that he is going to make with Israel. What is that peace treaty going to do? it's going to enable the rebuilding of the temple and the beginning of the sacrifices. How do you know that has to happen? Because after the first half of that 70th week, the temple is going to be desecrated and the sacrifices are going to be stopped. So obviously, it will have had to be rebuilt. Then you're going to have the tribulation, then the final battle, and then Jesus returns to defeat all his enemies. That's what John Hagee was talking about and what the people are cheering. And in that interpretation, those enemies are the enemies of Israel. So here is a typical middle of the road expression of this. The clock for the 70th week will begin ticking on the unfolding of these events when the ruler of this is a new European confederacy. So this one is dated a few years back, before 9/11. Makes a 7-year treaty with the nation of Israel, Daniel 9:27, treaty which will seem to ensure Israel's peace and safety. For 3.5 years, Israel will enjoy a state of relative peace. Then this ruler will enter the newly constructed temple, declare himself to be God, erect a statue of himself, and so on. And this is somebody who is not hostile to the Palestinians and the Arabs. But this is clear what he expects to happen. And I found that some websites pushed this so far that they were actually interpreting the events around October the 7th, 2023, as a direct fulfillment of this prophecy. So the idea that Hamas launched their attack to put a stop to Jewish sacrifices before they'd even started. And this is linked in with actually a speech from one of the Hamas leaders 100 days after October the 6th, which mentioned some intentions to rebuild the temple and the sacrifice of the red cows and all that goes with that, as one of the reasons that the Al-Aqsa flood was needed. So this idea that this is an actual one-to-one link, and that the word flood in Daniel 9 is actually referring to the Al-Aqsa flood. What has all this got to do with Islam? Well, in some ways, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Islam. So in the early period, and I can only give you the names here because we just don't have time to go to the details. This is in the 19th and early 20th century. People were saying, Israel is going to return to the land. God's not finished with the Jews. And that is in some ways part of the strength of dispensationalism. And they were recognizing that something was going to have to happen in the Middle East before that happened, and that maybe the decline of the Ottoman Empire might have something to do with that. But that was about as far as they got, and you hardly got even any mention of that in their writings. As you move on into the 20th century, you get this dispensationalism, which was originally within the Brethren Church, moving out through seminaries, through particularly Schofield's Reference Bible, through a whole series of conferences. And seminaries like Dallas Theological Seminary and Moody Bible Institute that were thoroughly dispensationalist. If you want to be a teacher at Dallas Theological Seminary, you have to sign up to this view of eschatology. You have some thoughtful biblical scholars like Robert Culver did a lot of work coming to the conclusion that this was the way to interpret Daniel, but saying zero about how that might apply into actual politics and what might happen. John Valverde, who's a big name from Dallas Theological Seminary, in his commentaries said only a little bit about what might actually happen in the Middle East. But when you move on to current teachers, people like John Hagee, they're doing direct applications. And what I found was that there's a progression going on in popular thinking that develops on the back of the biblical interpretation that people are doing. So you can see this progression here just from these second and third editions of books by John Valverde. So in 1990, you have a book on Armageddon, oil, and the Middle East crisis. So he's beginning there to apply this into what was going on in the Middle East in the 1990s. By the time you get into the 2000s, after John Valverde's actually died, you have the book revised by his son. And, well, you see the new title, Armageddon, Oil and Terror. And you get whole chapters in there on Islamic terrorism. So what you're seeing is the applied theology is responding to the political situation, which is not surprising. That's the way apocalyptic thinking works. So more and more you get the Middle Eastern nations who happen to be Muslim portrayed as the enemies of Israel, and from 9/11 they're the enemies of America as well. Now, I want to underline that this does not necessarily lead to hostility to the Middle Eastern nations or to Islam. So here is Charles Dyer from Moody Bible Institute speaking in October 2020. He says, we've got the answer, and it's to share the truth. We're told to speak the truth, love. And we need to speak the truth that God has a plan for Israel and a future for Israel. But we need to do it in a way that's showing love, both for the Jewish people and for the Arab people. We have the answer, and we're to be that peacemaker. You get it? He believes that the Antichrist is going to make peace. And he believes that that peace is not going to last very long. But he also believes that Christian people's job is to be peacemakers. And he's somebody who's spent a great deal of time in the Middle East and has got lots of Muslim friends as well as Jewish and Christian friends. Now, all that stuff doesn't worry me so much. What really worries me is the different strand of thinking that I found leading that was looking at Daniel 10:13, the Prince of Persia. So some of the people that follow this strand have grown out of the other strand. And in popular thinking, the two strands are mixed. The research seems to show that people draw ideas from all over the place. And I certainly observe that in people that I meet. So these people are basically post-millennial. That is, they expect the reign of Jesus to be established through the church before the second coming. They have a focus on what are known as territorial spirits. So the idea of, this is the interpretation from Daniel 10:13, is that as there was some kind of malign spiritual influence called the Prince of Persia that was governing the Persian Empire at the time of Daniel, so other nations and peoples have spiritual forces which are driving them, and that in recent times in the Middle East, some of those ancient spirits have been reactivated, and in particular, the Prince of Persia, who has always been hostile to Israel, and now is hostile to Israel. So if you see an area where there's a lot of violence or where it's very resistant to the Christian gospel, then the way that you deal with it is to pray against those territorial spirits. And what has happened, and you can, if you read this, this interesting book, The Violent Take It by Force, by Matthew Taylor, development of this in what is known as the New Apostolic Reformation. And in that, this idea of the territorial spirits has been linked in with the idea that we have prophets today. So you find whole networks of prophets, you find churches that are run by prophets, and where a whole lot of the ministry is not so much biblical exegesis as prophecy. So that second clip that I showed you is from a Texas church, which is run by one of those prophets, and they have a whole lot of recognized prophets in the congregation. And the woman who's speaking is one of the prophets. So she was speaking the Sunday after the October attack. And so this will have been accepted by the people listening as a prophecy from God. And the idea is that you not only have to pray, but you have to go and pray in the place where the spirits are dominating, and that's what's called boots on the ground. And you can see that going into American politics very strongly at the moment. Alongside of that, into the mixture, goes what is known as dominion theology, which is the idea that in Christ, Christian people are called to take back the dominion that God gave them at creation. And that is not just a spiritual dominion, it's an actual dominion now, and it's particularly over these 7 mountains of the different aspects of human life, including government, education, media, business, and so on. So this is not Christian nationalism, this is Christian supremacy. That the ecclesia, the church, is translated as a governing body. So this is a mixture of ideas. Now, again, one might ask where it comes from, so and what it has to do with Islam. Again, this is too much to give you now. What I found very disturbing, the key figure at the base of this is a man called Peter Wagner, who was very much involved in the church growth movement that grew out of Fuller Seminary in the United States. And this church growth movement is the idea that you need to study to see what it is that makes churches grow. So you use social science to discover that, and then you put whatever you find into practice. I'm not against social science. You'll be glad to know, Britain. But when it takes over from biblical studies and theology and turns everything into a method, how will we make the church grow? It seems to me that you're in trouble. So Peter Wagner understood that some of the Pentecostal churches were growing, and he came to believe that the key thing was spiritual warfare. So he says, one of the bedrock principles of the church growth movement is resistance receptivity theory. This postulates that through analysis of certain indicators, the degree of resistance or receptivity to the gospel on the part of a given people group can be anticipated with certain ranges of accuracy. It goes without saying that if this hypothesis concerning territorial spirits is correct, i.e. if it's the territorial spirits that are keeping people from the gospel, and if we could learn how to break through their control through the power of God, positions on the resistance receptivity axis could change virtually overnight. It's logical. And what I have realized about these systems is they are logical. They have their own logic, and if you get in here, it actually makes sense. Now, in terms of Islam, Peter Wagner wasn't particularly interested in Islam, and he wasn't terribly interested in apocalyptic either. But back in the 19 80s, I think. There was a man called George Otis Jr. who was interested in Islam and was interested in apocalyptic. And he wrote a book called this, The Last of the Giants, Lifting the Veil on Islam and the End Times, in 1991. So in this, he was arguing this hierarchy of evil powers around the earth. And he included the Prince of Persia, the Prince of Greece, and also the King of Tyre in Ezekiel and the Spirit of Babylon in Revelation. And you can see that Tyre, Persia, and Babylon are all around the Middle East. And he has a whole chapter on the re-emergence of the Prince of Persia. He also has a chapter on, the Spirit of Babylon and so on. But he ends his chapter, in the manner of all blood-sucking gods, the Prince of Persia will in the short term grow even stronger and more formidable. His rallying point will be the ensign of Islamic fundamentalism, and as it is lifted ever higher in the years ahead, the hatreds of millions of terminally sentenced demons will give way to a level of violence the world has not yet known. This is written in 1991. So you can see how that seed can grow. So this stage, this is about spiritual warfare. This is not about physical warfare. And these ideas are taken by Peter Wagner and George Otis to the Lausanne conferences. These are major worldwide missionary conferences, and the whole thing is debated. So this idea of the territorial spirits has quite a strong effect on Christian mission all around the world, although it gets critiqued and some of it fades away. But particularly in the USA, it persists and grows into this new apostolic reform movement. So the ideas are pervasive enough that Christian people are very open to listening to some of this material. If you want to follow it up, coming into the present era, there's a whole list of names of people to look out for who picked up on this. They're largely responsible for mega churches in the Pentecostal tradition. They really use the internet, Facebook, YouTube, TV channels, so they're easy to find. And you'll find that many of them are the groups surrounding President Trump today. So Paula White, I've put at the head here. And Chuck Pierce is the head of the church that I played that initial video clip from. Sorry, I've lost my cursor. So yeah, the other person to look out for is Jonathan Kahn. He has more than 1 million subscribers on his YouTube. He is a Messianic Jew. And this is something that's quite important, that you find that a lot of people in both of these movements are very open to listen to Messianic Jewish people. And if you look at Chuck Pierce's church, it actually calls itself Glory of Zion International. And they practice quite a lot of the Jewish rituals as part of their Pentecostal Christian church. So if you really want to be blown away by parallels between the Bible and what's going on today, look for Jonathan Kahn. Ask me afterwards if you want more. Again, can I underline that this is not necessarily anti-Islamic? So in the introduction to George Otis's book, we read this: it's important to recognize that Otis is not at all attacking Islam as such, but merely suggesting that dark underlying spiritual forces have in some instances turned particular groups of Muslim believers into harsh antagonists of all opposing religious views. The corollary of this view, of course, is that some self-styled Christian groups in historical times have also behaved in ways that could only be described as demonic. So this is not necessarily targeting Islam, and it's also saying that if Iran is under the Prince of Persia, that's not an Islamic thing, because the Prince of Persia has existed from way before Islamic times. So it's not necessary, but as far as I can see, it correlates with very negative views of Islam. It's just another quotation where somebody is insisting that how much you have to pray against the Prince of Persia. You need to love Muslim people. So as I've been reflecting on this and digging into all these details, I've been trying to work out what's actually going on and why is this happening in America. Why do people feel the need to interpret these verses in this way, to apply them in this way? Because if I can do that, maybe I can work out how the message of the book of Daniel might actually be good news in the midst of the current conflicts. So what's the common ground between all these different voices I've been listening to? Well, the common ground is clearly Israel. This is the focus, and it's the focus on Israel that is the context for the hostility that's being felt towards Israel's enemies. These are all very thorough Zionist people. What's the motivator for this? Well, there's a variety of motivators, but the major stated one, and this comes over and over and over again, is if you want to be blessed, you have to bless Israel. You see this kind of transactional thing? What's the method for blessing? So Abraham, this is God's promise to Abraham. He says, I'll bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So people go to great lengths to give proof of the fact that when you bless Israel, you get blessed, and when you curse Israel, you'll get cursed. So there's a straight jump from this verse, which is addressed to Abraham, to not only the Jewish people, but to the state of Israel today.
Sorry, excuse me, Ida, is your PowerPoint meant to be going on? You've been stuck on that slide for...
Oh. It says my screen sharing's paused. Why would it have done that?
I don't know, just maybe stop on
Sharing start again. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I won't go back because Martin will tell me off for running out of time.
Yeah.
So one common ground is Israel. The other common ground is that these people are all sitting in the United States of America. The United States of America is an extraordinary place. And there seems to be a link in people's minds between Israel and the United States of America. Now, this is something that goes back in American history. People cite the Pilgrim Fathers, who thought that they were re-establishing the Promised Land. They were the new Israel, as it were. Now, I don't think that they, for a moment, thought that they were going to be founding a whole new nation that would be called America, and that would, as a nation, be the new Israel. they were a small group running away from persecution, trying to establish themselves as the people of God. But there is this kind of idea of American exceptionalism. And I have found David Grafton quite helpful on this. He did an interesting study of some American, what he called biblical Orientalists back in the 19th century. And what he discovered was that what they reported in America tended to be different from their own thinking and the way that they interacted in great depth with people when they were in the Middle East. They learned Arabic, they interact with people, and they appreciated the culture. But in talking to the people in America, they had to not only do biblical interpretation, but also take into account this American exceptionalism. And he says this in his conclusion: the indigenous people of Bible lands served a particular purpose. Now, this is quite something in itself, isn't it? The indigenous people of Bible lands are not people in their own right. They serve a purpose. They either assisted the American Bible readers and pilgrims in their understanding of the Bible, as unchanging and living examples of the biblical stories, or they were to be despised for their infidelity to their roles as biblical characters. And in that, what was the space for Muslim people as Muslim people? And he says that he thinks that this is really important for understanding the roots of what goes on today. And he talks about that today we have continued American cultural projections of the Bible lands and its indigenous peoples onto the model Middle East today. So it seems to me that one of the things that happens is that people sitting in America, understanding things through their own culture and their own theology, are then projecting that onto the Middle East, rather than really trying to understand Middle Eastern peoples in their own right. So I'm currently grappling towards some kind of analytical framework that I can apply to this. So I have long said that I think that the question of territory is something that's at the key for most conflicts. And those of you who've read my writing will know that I have this, what I call a dangerous triangle of land, people, and power that is there in creation, but then as people use power to establish themselves in their own land rather than function under God, this becomes a very dangerous triangle. But I find this land, people, and power a very useful thing to look at. But I've also, in the American context, been thinking about what people call an alternative reality. And when you listen to the way that these people describe the Middle East and compare it to the way that others describe the Middle East, it's like two different realities. And thinking of Daniel, the book of Daniel is actually about an alternative reality because it tells you about the empires on the ground, and it also tells you about God's kingdom in heaven. So what's going on in terms of alternative reality? Well, I think that there's a confusion over land, and that people are projecting their feelings about the land of America onto the land of Israel and getting very confused about which is which and which they belong to. And a threat to Israel feels like a threat to America and vice versa. I think along with this, there is a kind of imagined people. So there's a question of when you become a Christian, you get incorporated into the people of Abraham. Now, what does that mean? And how far does it mean that you're getting incorporated into the ethnic Jewish people? Now, I can see Andrew raising his eyebrows, like, how could anybody believe that? They don't say that, but that seems to be what's happening. There's kind of takeover of Jewish ethnicity, an adoption of it, a confusion between who people are in Christ and actually the Jewish nation. So there's something going on there. I don't pretend to begin to understand it, but I think that's happening. And then, of course, there's this big thing about power, and there's a conflation between spiritual power and political power. And that's certainly what you're seeing going on in the things driving Trump and driving some of the discussion about what he's doing in Gaza today. And I think that one doesn't, in talking about power, one can't underestimate the power of knowledge in all this. And it seems to me that one of the things that's happening is that people like Jonathan Cahn and John Hagee and all these people, they're offering people the power of knowledge in a world in which they're very confused and they don't know what's going on. And it's like, look, we've got the secret. It's all predicted in the Bible. And the Prince of Persia and the Antichrist give us a framework. And I've been shocked to see how important these are as frameworks for all this thinking, that into this we unpack all the rest of the biblical mysteries and give you a glimpse of what's going on. So as I go forward, I'm asking myself, what makes a positive difference and enables people, at least in theory, to be peacemakers rather than hostility makers? And I think it's actually very basic. People who actually interact with the range of people, including Muslims and Palestinians and so on, tend to be much more ready to look for peace and love. That's a no-brainer. The other thing that I've noticed is that, particularly within the dispensationalist frameworks, there are some people that are very clear that Israel has no right to the land while she's breaking the covenant. So that blessing Israel does not mean being on the side of political Israel, no matter what. So that's something that makes a big difference. Then I'm taking forward what are the questions for interpreting Daniel. In my view, as a believing biblical scholar, if abuse of these verses in Daniel lies underneath a whole lot of hostility and things that I see as hugely problematic attitudes, right use of them must be what's needed. So I'm asking myself, what actually is Daniel about? Is it about, God's going to destroy his enemies, and by the way, they're Israel's enemies, and by the way, they're Muslims? No, it's not. It's about the nature of God. It's about the nature of imperial power. It's about the place of the people of God in relation to imperial power. And I think the key question is, where do we see ourselves in Daniel? What is the historical legacy that's got us to where we are? Within today's reality, who sees themselves as Israel in Daniel, i.e. that little people helpless people in exile, and who understands that they're actually part of an imperial power? Who should be listening to what Daniel says about the imperial powers? And are they doing that? Are we doing that? What was the purpose of the revelations given to Daniel? Was it the power of knowledge? all the rest of it. How did he react to them? And in particular, what's the real alternative reality? What actually is Daniel teaching about this spiritual world and how we should relate to it? So that's what I'm taking into my study of Daniel as a result of this. So as you can see, I've learnt a lot. I'm struggling to understand what's going on. I began with your questions, encouragements, comments, and insights. And if you want gruesome details, I've got some gruesome details. But
Great, thank you very much, Ida. Thank you.